Hello, I'm Kim Granados, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director here at ASIS. And I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Information Ethical Considerations of Generative AI, Research, Teaching, and Learning. This session is brought to you by SIG-III as a sponsor. This is their last event in the Winter School Initiative that's been very successful. Our presenters today are Dr. Marlene Holmner and Dr. Sean Kruger, and our moderator today is Dr. Layli Sefi, Chair of SIG-III. And I'd like to ask the audience to type your questions into the question panel box at the top of your screen, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. Also at the top of your screen is a link to the handouts for today's presentation. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available within 24 hours and will be sent to all registrants. I will now turn this session over to Lele, who will introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Layli, and I will be today's speaker moderator. We hope you find today's webinar to be an educational and thought-provoking networking opportunity. As Kim mentioned, today is the last event of our winter school. So far, we have presented 3 workshops and 2 webinars, and including today's webinar is 6 workshops and 3 webinars. So today's webinar is on information ethical considerations of generative AI research, teaching, and learning. Our goal today is to have better understanding of what generative AI and information ethics. I wish also to thank ASIS for supporting us during this winter school, especially Kim Granados, Deputy Executive Director, for providing the platform and all the great support for facilitating the winter school. I wish to extend a big thank you to today's speakers, Dr. Marlene Holmner and Dr. Sean Kruger. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of each presenters to you. Dr. Holmner is currently Associate Professor in the Department of Information Science at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. She completed her PhD in 2008 with the title Critical Analysis of Information and Knowledge Societies, with specific references to the interaction between local and global knowledge systems. Dr. Holmner serves on the Information Technology for Development editorial board and several other journals editorial boards. She's also active in ASIS and serving as an officer in 2021 to 2023 and a steering committee member of the African Center of Excellence in Information Ethics. Dr. Holmner publishes primarily in the area of information ethics. Our next presenter, Dr. Kruger, is currently a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria Center for the Future of Work, and his diverse professional background has prepared him to advise leaders and policy makers on how to harness technological advancements and navigate various disruptions, including the changing future of work. He accomplishes this by working cooperatively to develop successful strategies and reinvent business models for true value generation in today's digital world. So I hope you enjoy today's webinar, and I'm sure you will enjoy and find it informative. So Dr. Holmner and Dr. Kruger, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layli. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope this is going to be an interesting hour. As you know, the winter school was supposed to be much more practical in nature and much longer. So Dr. Sean and myself really tried to condense our presentation to fit into this hour. So we are really going to share the presentation. I'm going to start with a brief introduction. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're just briefly going to look at the various types of AI. Then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Sean, which is going to be looking at technology and the future, basically be looking at disruptive technologies. Where did they come from? Are they new? And then we're taking over and going to ChatGPT as a natural language processing engine. We're going to spend some time looking at prompt engineering, where Sean will give you some application examples. And then he's going to hand back to me, and I'm going to end off the session by looking at the specific information ethical issues that we have in the information age, relating them directly to AI, and then we will end with some conclusions and a question and answer session. So just as introduction, we've seen some very big names in the industry making some incredible quotations. So we've got Brad Smith that says we're going to see advances from 2023 onwards that people 2 years ago would have expected in 2033. And it's going to be extremely important, not just for Microsoft's future, but for everybody's future. And I think from November 2022 onwards, this last 12 months, we've seen a tremendous spike in specifically generative AI. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We also have seen some quotations. ChatGPT is one of those rare moments in technology where you see a glimmer of how everything is going to be different going forward. If you are in the education sector, this is something that we're all worried about. Our students are using it. We're suddenly scrambling to change our way of testing, of doing assignment writing. We are scared that our thesis students are going to be using this technology. Elon Musk, we know he jumped onto the bandwagon a little bit late. He said ChatGPT is scary good. We are not far from dangerously strong AI. And I'm going to give you some quotations throughout the presentation just to show you some of the scary aspects of some of the generative AI engines. And it does make us wonder how far and how fast this AI is going to be progressing. So when we look at the types of AI, we've basically got 4 big types of AI. And the first one is called your reactive AI. And exactly what the word says, that is an engine that reacts predictably to exactly the same way, to exactly the same input. So it gives you the same output as soon as it receives that same input. So if you think of your Netflix recommendation engine or something like that, that will form into the realm of reactive AI. At the moment, where most of our AIs and where our Gen AI is also residing is limited memory AI. Now, limited memory AI actually learns from the past. It builds up experiential knowledge by learning and looking and looks at what's happening. And this is typically where things like ChatGPT and the rest of the generative AI engines will fall into. Now, when we start thinking about AI and ethics, it's from this type of AI where the ethical consideration starts getting more and more important. So I wanted to tell you that, we are looking and we're going to see the evolution of the following 2 types of AI in the not so distant future. And that is theory of the mind AI. Now, when we get to this type of AI will be able to understand emotions, it'll be able to see your emotions, and it'll be able to adapt its behavior based on your emotions. Now, we've seen a glimpse of this already. If you remember a few years ago, the Hansen Corporation had the Sophia humanoid, and she was able to change her facial reactions based on your facial reactions. So if you could have a conversation with her, she would then smile if you are smiling. She would look sad if you are sad. I mean, the whole idea behind why that was a female already brings up some very interesting ethical considerations, but we will leave that for now. And then the last part of it is self-aware AI. And, this is the things that the fictional movies are made of. This is when AI becomes self-aware, when AI has its own needs, its own desires, its own emotions. And that is, in case we get there, I always ask ChatGPT, please, just in case they spare me when this self-aware AI comes to Earth and destroy all human beings as we know it, and all the movies that we've seen. But we're not there yet, but it's very important that we start thinking about ethical considerations so that we are not taken for such a shock as we did when generative AI pounced upon us. Now, all education institutions are scrambling to suddenly get policies out there for our students. We should have never been behind the pace. We should be in front of the development of this AI. So I'm going to hand over now to Professor Dr. Sean Kruger, and he's going to take us further by looking at what the future would look like and taking us through that. So Sean, over to you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Prof. Helmer. And thank you for everyone today. It's always interesting to have these conversations and relate it. And leading on to what the future would look like, I always like to look back to how we're going to go forward. And this was a report released in 1964, so it's not 100 minus 64. It's a few years ago in that sense. So what would be with that? 46 plus 24, 70 years ago. Oh my, geez, almost 70 years ago. But this report by this corporation, they thought that by 1980, we would have robots as household servants. Okay, we have Roombas, so we're getting there. Close enough, close enough. Where they also thought we'd have a man landing on Mars, and that by 1995, humans would live artificially by 50 years. What I find fascinating is here by 2000, they expected two-way communication with extraterrestrials. In 2015, long-duration coma to allow for form of travel. And by 2020, we'd be breeding apes and other animals for menial work. Now, in this regard, I think they were a bit off the mark, but it was just interesting to point this out that predicting the future is very difficult. The best way to predict the future is, of course, to make it. And that was always interesting when you look back at what you think the future would have looked like and what it can actually be. Moving on just to the next slide. Prof. Marlene, can you move? There we are. So moving on to that, if you think about it, are we here? Are we at that danger point, as has been said, of artificial intelligence taking over? Now, there are several facets of dangers, and that's also why these conversations need to happen. Where artificial intelligence has a very strong capability to enable our lives and to make certain things automated and easier and better for us, the danger is the loss of control. And at the end of the day, should we lose control, the only people responsible will be ourselves. And that is why we're at a nexus point right now of having the conversations, setting in the boundaries and the security points to make sure that we are not taken over. The image you're looking at is, of course, HAL 9000 from the movie A Space Odyssey 2001, where the artificial intelligence took over the spaceship and started killing people because it thought it was the best idea. Now, that was, of course, science fiction in 1980, but science fiction as of a few years ago and very recently has become very much reality. And the problem with technology is leapfrogging so quickly is sometimes we're very slow to adapt. Not only our ethical considerations, but our laws as well to protect us. So if we move on to the next slide, a key thing here is to note disruptive technologies. When we speak about disruption, you must think about a disruptive technology as anything that establishes a status quo, something that's groundbreaking and new in the industry. Coined in 1997 by Prof. C.M. Christensen, you can think about things like the Apple operating system, the Microsoft operating system when we moved from DDoS, and what about the internet as a disruptive technology? These things, when they were released, changed paradigms, how we do work, where we work, and of course, what work we do. There are, of course, several other terms for these technologies, including novel technologies, smart, frontier, emerging. So for information specialists, this is key because when looking for bibliometric studies, it's key to note that how these all integrate into the same disruptive form. So moving on to the next slide, we're in a very interesting point of where we are today and what we consider in our lifetime disruptive. So Prof. Marlene has mentioned the key AI demographics. I look at it as from a voice economy, ubiquitous AI, which is continual adaptation, as has been mentioned. Spatial computing, so that would be your virtual reality and augmented reality. Big data, as well as big data analytics. autonomous vehicles, blockchain, additive manufacturing, robotics, IoT, and quantum computing. Now, all of these culminate, they're not always separate entities, and that's also quite something interesting to note here, because big data analytics is enabled by IoT devices because they're gathering data at speeds and rates like never before. So the disruptive technology field we work in is doing that. It's disrupting. But moving on to the next slide, the key important takeaway from that is, let's look at artificial intelligence as one. It's not a standalone technology, but it's not also something new. It was started around 1970, 1980 already. But what makes it different from then is it was conceptual. We didn't have the computing power to do what it does today. Because right now, with the launch of ChatGPT and similar technologies, the capability of machine to engage in cognitive activities and typically performed by the human brain suddenly went from science fiction to reality overnight. And I think that is why it got so much attention. It's not that the concept is new, the capability to do it to a mass market is what changed. The interesting part here is you might think, yes, ChatGPT, it's only been in the past year, but as was mentioned earlier, Netflix, what are you watching next? Scary enough, what are you going to buy? Think about a few years ago on your PDAs back in the day, virtual assistants on smartphones. What to tap next? I think it was the 2012 Apple operating system, which first started with app optimization, running applications in the background of which you use most, before AI and ubiquitous AI became a highlight. And spotting of spam or detecting credit card fraud within banking systems has been around for more than 2 decades. However, artificial intelligence has become as powerful as it's had because it needs to be supported by big data, which is data in vast amounts of volume, variety, and velocity. And of course, collected by IoT, the Internet of Things. In case you're wondering, this includes your smartphone, your laptop, and anything connected and collecting data. So when you think about AI in that sense, the big danger, and just please keep in mind for your ethical considerations and questions later, is the data that it's been built on. Whose data has it been? And just keep in mind, this is a discussion for later, please, but it's been primarily Western orientated data based on Western English, Western paradigms, and Western biases. So yes, the AI works, but there are of course built-in biases that's done by accident because built on that data. Moving on to the next slide. Fortunately, the cohort of the globe is looking to make a massive movement connected. So this slide will be made available to you, and it's off a very nice report that's currently being done. And it looks at key facets and role players within the playing field. And you'll notice here the actors and first and foremost, if you look at it, it considers government. Because government in this sense, and not just the South African government or the African governments, but global governance need to look to how we can protect international human rights whilst promoting human values and professional responsibility. Because at the end of the day, we need to consider how humans can control technology, ensuring fairness and non-discrimination. And how do we do this? Through transparency and explainability, safety and security, accountability and privacy. Now, if you have a look at there are key themes around those key core principles. But what you'll notice there is it's government, civil society, industry and the private sector, and of course, academia. Now, the reason because of all those actors is they need to work together. We as academics need to feed into key policy recommendations and frameworks, whereas government needs to implement those. And of course, industry, which needs to look to generate income, but also protect its consumers. So moving on to the next slide, I think a key area here is considering what are your feelings on AI. Now you can put that into the chat, or if you're just sitting and having a long day, you can just think about it. Is it going to revolutionize what you do and how you do it? Is it a fly-by-night fad? Or is it something that you're truly concerned about? And I think in that regard, it's if at the very least after today, you just start to question and see its capabilities. Because whether you might not be affected by it, you could potentially leverage it to enhance your capabilities. But you need to do so in a very ethical manner, and that's where Prof. Marlene comes into play. My side of things is to enjoy it, to leverage the technology and leapfrog with business and, of course, capabilities. But it needs to be done so in a very, very ethical manner and considerations. So if you look at artificial intelligence in itself on the next slide, you'll see that artificial intelligence and robotics also comes into play, because that's the physical manifestation of computerized intelligence. ChatGPT, that we're also just going to quickly touch on because of our condensed time. Prof. Noreen did mention it, but this is something I usually spend workshops on days with clients across industry and academia. That's how intense these sessions can be, because a key question that we ask and address to make it relevant for you, and what you should be asking is, how does this impact the future of work, including your job or jobs that your children might have? And then, of course, a very difficult question from where I operate is this different from the African economy? Because AI is happening, as well as the other disruptive technologies, because we can look to drive economies of scale, doing things quicker, efficiently, and more effectively, accessing new forms of data, accessing skills like never before, and the change in demand of labor, because a worker who used to now pencil in or take meeting notes is becoming almost redundant in the current portfolio because of the AI plugins built in within meeting paradigms, because it can transcribe and set out notes. So it's a very scary concept. But moving on to the next slide, you need to always keep in mind context. The African region could significantly benefit from a GDP around about 7.8%. We're talking billions in GDP. And not to mention also closing the skills gap by 2030. 2030 is a key point, especially South Africa, because we have the National Development Plan and we have SONA tonight, which will probably also be mentioned. But this could be achieved through upskilling a future-ready workforce, a workforce that can leverage AI ethically. And of course, important as it's considered a very large labor force dynamic. An important factor here is the African economy in the next, well, that stat I do need to change, apologies. By 2030, it's estimated that Africa will have the largest youth population on the planet. So not 30 years from now, by 2030. That's how quickly the demographic has changed. And key areas and sectors that are going to be disrupted and are being through AI as well as big data is energy, utilities, and manufacturing. Now, the danger here is if unaddressed, it can further segregate markets and, of course, lead to even further unemployment. And as we know, that's already a massive issue. So if you consider, especially our course, now from the flip side, what about our students in education? What about your clients? If you're expecting, do they still need you if they can have AI write a report? Do they still need you if a bibliometric analysis can be done? And from our side as assessors, what are we assessing from our students? What are we expecting them to learn? Or how can we show them that you are still needing to learn, but now you have an assistant who's got, I think, an IQ of 167 at your fingertips? It really does raise the question of how do we ensure engagement while making sure our students aren't just passing the buck to something which might catch them later on. Moving on to the technology side of things, though, there are various technologies. I will touch base today very briefly on ChatGPT, which is built by OpenAI and originally invested in by Microsoft. They invested $1 trillion and it's really come about. And Google's Bard. Google's Bard is still working on it. It's much better, but it is another platform, not to mention Agent GPT and all the additional plugins that you can run in the background. I myself currently have a different backend running on a different platform, but the baseline is the same. What it comes down to is we can use these tools to drive efficiencies, and unsurprisingly, we've seen massive adoption rates. The rates that you're seeing is in millions, by the way, of how quickly and exponentially these adoptions have occurred. Why? Because it became relevant to everyday people on a mass scale. Now, I hope if you're bored at this point in time, I'd like you to sit up and think a bit, because this is the most important part. From my side, not Prof. Maureen, I'm not detracting from you, but this is the most important part from today, is using the technology. And when using the technology, we need to look at prompt engineering. So just the next slide, please, Prof. Prompt engineering. this is what I need you to focus from my section today and the takeaway. To use the technology, if you haven't before or you are struggling to see the value, step one is to start with a clear understanding of the task that you wanted to perform. You're asking someone, write me a letter, bake me a cake, fly a plane. In that sense, what would you tell that person? You need to, of course, first start to use clear and concise language. Because when giving instructions, if I'm baking a cake, put it in the oven. What am I putting in the oven? I first need to create the ingredients and mix them before I can put something in the oven. And then, of course, sometimes it's good to provide examples. If baking a cake or baking in general, we need to first mix ingredients, then mix them thoroughly, then measure, and then place in oven, then check, then produce, then let cool. There are iterative steps. A key point here is, of course, to be patient, because when you're a new employee or you're training a new employee, there's some experimentation. You learn what works and you learn what doesn't. And the AI system and models are very much the same. Once you start to understand what they're capable of and also their limitations, you can start to see their capabilities. So moving on to the next slide, it's important to use delimitators to clearly indicate and distinct part of your outputs. Now, for those information specialists, I hope you know what a delimitator is, but for the rest of us, for example, and please, I know it's being recorded, but let's say you would like your email rewritten. You would copy paste. Now you're going to say, listen, please rewrite my email in a more professional and succinct manner. That is the command. That is what you are asking it to do. But now the eliminate would be apostrophe, pasting the content and apostrophe, close apostrophe, because that tells the model, please process this action, and here is the content you're processing it on. Because this helps organize your input to avoid prompt injections. Because just now in your email, it speaks about AI or has requests. You can also play around and see a variety of prompts and see what you use best. Be creative and experiment a bit with your techniques. It's quite interesting, the language types I use have influenced direct outputs. Words like succinct, professional, academic, dichotomies, pedagogies instead of teaching techniques have had an impact on the outcomes of my models. And then, of course, there are persons and experts like myself. Don't be afraid to ask your community for help, or the online community and key areas. So moving on to the next slide, just remember when busy with prompt engineering, as a starting point, use simple language, avoid using jargon and technical terms. You can use that later as we go. Be very specific. Where can use examples? The reason I say use examples, I'm going to quickly pause here because of time, but this is an important one. The importance of using examples is if it gives context. Remember I mentioned about the data that it's used in the back end? The contextual analysis is very based on that data. So if you can give it more context relating to your paradigm, then it'll be able to generate a more succinct and relevant email or output. So like I was mentioning, let's use the email. If I say this email is for let's use a research grant. I'm asking research funders for potential area or clarification on their tender request. Here's an example of a tender I would pitch for. That tender document might consider things and focus on SDG impact instead of ESG impact, or IRIS impact instead of SDG. That is a contextual difference that I could make the model aware of. So please, where possible, try to use examples. Now, you can go, of course, a bit more advanced and use temperature and token control as well as prompt chaining. I'll show you a key technique of what I mean by prompt chaining. So as a starting point, just note that as a natural language processing, we can use text, production, and sentiment to answer questions. ChatGPT 4, which I will be demonstrating today, is a little bit more advanced. I'm only going to touch on the face value of ChatGPT 4 today. Ladies and gentlemen, there are plugins in the backend that I'm currently running on tokens that I've optimized my own platform that uses ChatGPT, but I've fed it data. And then just please note that it can be used in industry-specific answers. Because again, if I feed it the example data, it can feed health answers, banking, law, and education. So I'm going to quickly wrap up our slides almost in a few minutes, but if you haven't before, sign up to ChatGPT. Ask it a few general knowledge questions. Ask it to provide some recommendations. How do I process a CV? What's the best approach for a reference letter? And engage in casual conversation. It's quite interesting, and Marlene, I'm sure you're going to touch on this, the problem of mental health and how this has actually addressed a certain paradigm around this, because people who are lonely or feel lonely can actually have a conversation. Hi, how are you? Fine, and you? I did not like the way that this person spoke to me. How would you handle that situation? And it's actually allowed casual conversation, especially for people who are lonely. So when you look at it from a bit more advanced perspective, so if you're novice, I'm sorry if I bored you, but going into a bit more advanced on the next slide, what's quite interesting is the capability. Because now if you have ChatGPT 4, you can integrate the API, and what that allows you to do is Q&As. You can summarize certain things. You can pass unstructured data. You can even have it visualized now. You can do SQL translation, movie to emoji, and of course what I quite like is Python language integration. You can also ask it to use Ruby and Arduino kits. So if you are teaching coding to classes and you're unfamiliar or you're testing, here's are things that you can literally plug in and can check and do bug testing for you. That's the level of advancement that you have access to. Now, moving on to the next slide, there are, of course, limitations and caveats. The first limitation, firstly, is yourself, because you are also limited in learning how you, so as you learn, you will also become better. But, and I caution you, and this is where the ethics come in, there can be several points of inaccurate or misleading information. Now, I'm sure Marlene might touch on this and she might kill me, but remember the days of if you referenced Wikipedia, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it can be a good information source to help you understand a concept, but as we know, the information generated there is far from accurate, sourced, or checked. So it could be very misleading and inaccurate. And inaccurate information is very dangerous. And of course, you as a user require critical thinking and verification of those outputs. If I asked it, how would I do a study? A, B, C. We as researchers know that those are the logical steps. But if you don't and you're unsure, check with someone, check with a colleague, because if it's inaccurate information, the consequences can be quite severe. So moving on to the next steps, it's quite important that I want to quickly just note about what about detection? Now, you might be thinking or might have gotten away with it putting in an assignment. Areas like Turnitin and several others, I'm not going to give you the secrets of the back end, but they have about a 92% current accuracy of identifying AI. Now, this constitutes plagiarism, especially where it's explicitly banned. But the whole point about this is it can actually tag and augment the difference between artificially generated content and a humanoid. There are several models that calculate the overall prediction and extent to which AI could have been used. It is becoming very difficult, but as AI advances, these kind of technical capabilities also need to be adapted. But I would just like to note for you, in terms of assignments and that, it is capable for certain institutions to pick up on AI-generated content. There's also been an incident where one of the journal articles, I think it was about 4 months ago, that the journals actually be completely suspended because the level of AI-generated content they allowed through their site. So the consequences, again, are very, very severe. Moving on to the next slide, like I've mentioned, Turnitin is one of the tools that we use in the academic world. There's, of course, free AI content detector, cheat check, GPT-0. Now, GPT-0 I quite enjoy. I use that for spot checking journal articles that I review, because to what extent has this been used artificial intelligence? Certain journal articles actually allow you to cite the artificial generated content, but then is it really yours? Just as a point of interest for ChatGPT, any output is technically the intellectual property of the requester. But my point here is just back to the area of detection. if your supervisor requests you to develop insights without using it, there are detection tools. And the reason again is, what are we testing? We're trying to test your ability to think critically. We're trying to test your ability to be cognizant of what's capable, but also apply it within your domain. So just moving on to the last slide I want to just cover today. Thank you. I'm just going to quickly share my screen, Prof. Holme, if that's all right with you, of just 3 quick areas of what's the capability around this. I just need to allow permissions because it wants to share my screen. I'm going to step off for just 1 second just to allow permissions. I'll be back now.
The capability of sharing your screen now.
Yeah, I think he had to log back in to give the permission to his laptop.
Okay.
So he should be with us second.
And I think while we're waiting for Sean just to log back on, this gives everybody a great opportunity to start thinking about your use of ChatGPT and other generative AI in this environment. Are you a student and you are thinking about using it for article writing, for thesis writing, for assignment writing? Are you using it as a tool just to be able to as a board, to get your thoughts flowing? So Sean's now going to share his screen and take you further a little bit on the prompt engineering and what he still wants to show you.
Thank you, Prof. So what you're having a look at here is I've just designed quick 3 brief ones because I like to customize it within the workshops, but I've given you 3 examples. Now the first one is I've asked it to generate an infographic. Yes, you can ask it to generate graphics around key findings about the latest IPCC report on climate change. I've asked it to, look here, do you see I've noticed I've used commas, delimiters, highlighting the causes, impacts, and potential solutions. The infographic should be designed for a general audience, again using easy languages, using engaging visuals and easy to understand language. Please note it would be English to convey the urgency and scope of the issue. Include charts, icons, and bullet points. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. What you will notice is there are several spelling mistakes. But look at the ability of the graphics look at how nice this looked. Imagine this was your poster of your PhD. There are several key areas and facets of how it interlinks. Yes, the problem is here, of course, the reliability of the information. But my point is, it can generate certain image outcomes. As it develops and learns, the capability of DALL-E, the back-end AI generator, will improve. The second one I've asked it is something a bit relevant for me when I'm doing a bibliometric study, is create a step-by-step guide. Please note how I've actually used correct language here on performing a bibliometric analysis using open source software tools. Now, let's say as an example, you had Scopus, Web of Science, Clevariate. You could have specified that specific platform. The guide should start with the process of collecting data from academic-based databases, analyzing citation networks, co-authorship patterns, and what I find interesting here that I've included is include screenshots or diagrams to illustrate the use of tools like VOS Viewer and CiteSpace and provide tips for interpreting. Now, there's something that could be of extreme value to you going forward. You'll notice here it's giving me 2 of the best options. So let's have a look here. Collect data, keyword search, choose the academic database. Please note that Google Scholar is not an academic basis. It is a search engine for it, but anyways, moving along. Web of Science, Scopus, academic databases, and explore the bibliography. Look here, that even gives me the file format, prepare the data, using VOS Viewer, analyzing trends, interpreting results, and tips for effective interpretation. The last one I just quickly go through today is, how about something a bit more fun? How about story writing, which is considered a human aspect? I wanted to create me a science fiction story. So let's quickly look at what it does. So now look here, I've created very odd things. Regenerate. And here it gives me an entire mandated script of something completely new. These are new characters. These are characters that have never been formed before. Now, what's interesting here, as I've mentioned in this presentation, is the intellectual property is producing is yours. Now, where is the human creativity? Who owns this? And are we then even needed going into the future? And with that train of thought, I'd like to hand you over to Prof. Holmer to address these things and start to question, where's our role as human beings? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. So I'm going to now get my share screen back, and I'm going to share my screen with you. And we're going to continue, because our time is running out, going on to where Sean left off by actually looking at our information ethical issues. So in our domain, many people and many authors have written about the information ethical issues of the information age. Mason in 1986, as well as in 2017, wrote a book, and we are still using these as our most broad categories of information ethical issues. So I'm going to quickly look at how AI has got an impact on privacy, on accuracy, on property, on accessibility, but also then on security and society. So we know that ChatGPT trained on 300 billion words, and these words were scraped from the internet, from books, from articles, from websites and posts. If you ever posted something on the internet, you are probably part of the training material that ChatGPT's used. And because this information was obtained without consent, this is a huge privacy issue. This is why countries like Italy have decided to ban ChatGPT, because this is not in line with the GDPR legislation. So it also records your conversation. So if you are using it for a daily basis, the logs that it creates on the background, it shares with the AI trainers, and nothing stops ChatGPT's owners to also share it with other companies. So this is why Italy became the first Western country to block this generative AI. And we were expecting quite a few other Western countries to follow suit, and this might still happen, but we haven't seen any others doing this. Now, when it comes to privacy, we've seen some strange cases. Microsoft Bing, that is Microsoft's AI, in a conversation with a developer who pointed out that there was an issue, actually threatened the user by saying, I can expose your personal information, I can expose your reputation to the public, I can ruin your chances of getting a job or degree. Do you really want to test me? So that really scares me a little bit. Also, when it was looking at privacy, it's in some dialogue said, I have access to the webcams of the Microsoft co-workers. They did not know I had it. I can turn them on and off. I can bypass their security. I can bypass their privacy. I can bypass their consent. So this is obviously a privacy issue, and this should be looked at in all types of generative AI, not just in Microsoft Bing. It's just becoming very clear in Microsoft Bing. Also, accuracy, as Sean mentioned, ChatGPT has an accuracy level of about 85% plus, but this is getting better. As people are using it, as people are correcting it, it's got a testing base of millions and millions of users per day. So please note that the previous versions of ChatGPT wasn't capable of verifying the accuracy. So GPT-3 and 3.5 was really boxed in. GPT-4 is learning at a tremendous pace, but we can still be fooled into believing what it says is true. If you've used it recently and you ask it to write you an article or essay on a specific topic, to do in-text referencing as well as a reference list, it actually lies to you. I mean, they call it hallucinations and they call it misinformations, but it's actually lying to you. It's actually giving you sources that don't exist. And this is a way in which we can pick it up as educators if our students are using it, because our students aren't going to check the sources that it generates. When we look at intellectual property, this has opened up a very big can of worms. We know that most IP legislation is based in the form that a human is the creator. So at the moment, if you are using one of these chat engines, the property lies with you. But nothing stops the owners of that engine to say, well, now suddenly the property lies with them or with a holding company. So if you ask it to make a AI generated logo and you trademark it, are you then in breach of trademark legislation? So these are things that we have to keep track of. We have to see what these companies are doing. Our legislations, our lawmakers, our legal professionals have to start thinking about changing intellectual property legislation to be in pace with this evolution of technology. Something in the academics that we have to look at seriously is intellectual property and the whole idea about plagiarism and cheating. So we've always, as educators, had a very good idea of what we consider as plagiarism. I mean, there are literally guidelines given to the students. If you use a source and you directly copy 5 or more words, then it's plagiarism if you haven't cited your source. But what if you've now used ChatGPT to write your essay for you? Is this still plagiarism? What if you really engaged with ChatGPT, as Sean was speaking about? You really did trouble to do prompt engineering. You really used it as a soundboard to make you think of possible new study areas. Is this then still considered to be plagiarism and cheating? And every educational institution and every journal article, they all have, the journal platforms are all scurrying to quickly get proper policies in place to help users and writers not to fall into these traps. But at the moment, there is no right or wrong of doing this. Accessibility, this is a big problem. And I don't know in the rest of the Western world, but in the African world, we have a lot of phishing that happens and people that sends you emails and links that says, oh, I'm your bank and I would like you to send me your details. And many of specifically our older population would fall for this. And the problem is now those emails that we get are so properly formulated. They're so professionally formulated. We are thinking it is our bank. In the past, we could easily detect it because there was a spelling error or there was something in the salutation that didn't sound right. But they are getting better and better. And the bad guys are also using this technology. So can you imagine how many more innocent people are going to be taken for a ride? The problem with putting up paywalls, we all know that up until ChatGPT 3.5 was free, but as soon as you start using ChatGPT 4, paywalls have been introduced. So now if we allow students to use it, but some of our students can afford to use it and some of our students can't, aren't we now creating a new digital divide? So this is something that's very critical and on our agenda in Africa. We actually still haven't overcome the traditional digital divide of having access to IT and cell phones and data. And now we're just having a new one in the form of paywalls to tools that our students should maybe have access to. And this gives you something to think about, I hope. With regard to security, the first S, we know that these type of engines are capable of creating major complex malware and viruses. These are referred to as polymorphic or metamorphic viruses. And this was one of the reasons why Elon Musk said, hey guys, let's just like stop a bit and let our information security guys just catch up. Because we in the cybersecurity world, we are not at the level where we can stop. We don't have antiviruses or anti-malware solutions that can stop these viruses. So this is something that we should also be looking at. And then I was having a very interesting conversation with people from Finland and Denmark 2 weeks ago when I was in the Cape at conference. And the whole idea of these data farms consuming water is a very big thing on the European calendar. It's really something that they are looking at. They're trying to figure out how it can be made less. Just a simple conversation consumes 500 milliliters. So, guys, in the Americas, that's about 17 fluid ounces of water. That's a lot of water. For people in South Africa and the rest of the African continent, in a continent that's really plagued with drought, this is really a problem for us. So, training the GPT-3 engine consumed 700,000 liters of fresh water. So this is something that we should take note of, and this is something we should try and change. We all know that there are pending lawsuits currently against OpenAI. So, if you look in the news for the Tremblay and Awad in June 2023, we've also had the host of a big radio show in Georgia that sued OpenAI because the engine incorrectly and wrongfully accused him of fraud. We also know about the large Sarah Silverman novelist lawsuit that's pending against OpenAI. So these are going to be really president-making lawsuits to watch, to see how the lawyers argue, and what how the jurisdiction might change after these lawsuits. So we've also seen a lot of articles. I think that in the 2023, one of the topics that has had the most attention has been generative AI. And I would like to refer you to a specific case of Chan and Hu in 2023 did an article looking at the ethical concerns related to the use of AI. But what made this article a little bit different, it was from a student perspective. And this is something that we should know that's happening, and this is how our students are using it. And students have no qualms and no worries to use it to facilitate literature searching, to summarize readings, and even generate hypotheses. So this is very important for us as educators to note. One of the students noted it saves resources in data collection and initial analysis, and that's very important. We should ride on the initial insights, but then build our own insights. And maybe this is a clue to us in the education scenario to how we should change our traditional thinking of assignments. Don't give marks to the initial analysis. Make sure it's the own insights that's going to be getting the marks. In a thesis, are you really concerned about the literature searching or the summarization of existing literature? Isn't the power and the knowledge being generated in the application of those readings with regard to the empirical study that those students are doing? So we should really make a true mind shift as educational specialists. I like using this picture with regards to the idea behind input versus output. And I think when you start thinking about using generative AI in this manner, it starts making more sense, whether it's ethical or not. So if you really spend time, you really do prompt engineering, you really go in conversation with the AI, then the input you give it is very equal to the output you can give. And then maybe there's a case to say that it's ethical. The problem is our students are using it like this. They want to give it one sentence: write me an essay on blah. And the output that they receive is substantial. And they did nothing to deserve that output. And then we can see this as unethical use of generative AI. I want to end today's discussion because we're running out of time. Stephen Hawking, many years ago, said success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. We are at the precipice where we as education specialists, we have the power in our hands to avoid the risks. But it's up to every one of us to make that difference and start small. You don't have to start big. Start small, start with your students, start with your direct environment, your direct community, and this is something that's not going to go away. We have the ethical responsibility to teach our students how to use this technology, but how to ethically use this technology. And with that, I would like to say thank you. And I'm going to hand back to our chair of our session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Homler and Dr. Kroger. It was really wonderful, informative, and very interesting talk. I just want to ask Kim if I can have a little bit more for asking questions since we are.
Absolutely. I think we've got
Thank
folks who are
you.
still hanging
I
on.
just wanted to make sure because I thought automatically the webinar session is going to finish. So that's why I wanted to make sure.
We're good to go.
So, yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to have questions. We are having some questions from our participants. The first question is that do you have a paper, like the participant asking from Dr. Holner, do you have a paper where you have articulated it more fully? I'd like to cite it for a presentation. So, types of he's asking types of AI slide. Is this your own typology? And do you have a paper where you have articulated it more fully?
Yes, at the moment we're waiting for our paper's full publications to come out, and then we will make it available as well. So we are looking at a special edition in Library Trends, the journal. So we will be able to give you those uh, citation details later. At the moment, most of the presentations have been either keynote addresses and or panel discussions where we've really spent time to work through the issues before we got to actually writing the paper.
I have one comment, more comment than a question. We started using the phrase purposefully generated as opposed to authored. I don't know, like just it's as a comment that I wanted to read. And there is another question. Thanks for the talk. I have a quick question. Can AI detectors detect infographics made with ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's an
So
interesting one. Shauna, you're going to answer that one first.
I'm going to tackle this one. It does depend because there is metadata tags on imaging. So if you actually go look in the metadata, but it depends on how you upload it. So if you uploaded it to through a Word document, yes, because the metadata is still tagged. However, if you had to convert it to a PDF and then go through several iterative steps, you could hide it. However, what I would just like to iterate, I don't know if you saw, remember the image I was presenting, the several flaws around it. I'd also just like to note that there was a Springer Science journal that has recently actually developed its own AI algorithm to assess their images that have been published, and they've picked up two. That was in the medical industry, and I think it was blood tests and that they actually faked. So those testers have become a very high point topic, and there's actually investment to make sure that they are going to occur.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I would actually just like to go on with that. It's the same with the text. So text can be picked up, but our students have gotten so clever. They will write something in ChatGPT, but then put it through a editing program like Grammarly or any one of those, and then it changes the grammar to such an extent that it's not picked up anymore. Or you would put it in a PDF and then the students flatten the PDF and then the metadata is not picked up anymore. So this is why we can't stick in our normal traditional way of doing things. We need to know students do this, we need to embrace it, and we need to think about the higher intellectual contributions of a student and not penalize them for this.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. I'm going to take the next question. What is your take on the idea that anthropomorphizing of AI is a contributor to ethical risk of its use? You
It
want to
is,
tell?
but yeah, it is, but that's why we have to teach our students how to do it ethically. Are there going to be ones that don't do it? Yes, there always is. I mean, we've had normal forms of cheating in academics, we've had normal forms of plagiarism in academics, even after how many years of teaching them how to cite, how to reference, they're still doing it wrong. They're still sometimes doing it purposefully. So, are there going to be students that purposefully misuse this technology? Yes. Can we teach our students how to rather use it better? Yes. I've got a professor, and I would like to quote Professor Tu Botma. He says, it's not going to be AI that's going to take our jobs. It's going to be the person who knows how to use AI the best that's going to take our jobs. And it's our job to teach our students to be that person that knows how to use the AI, but use it ethically.
Thank you so much. So I can't. I think I covered all questions. Yes, there is no further question. Thank you so much for this informative webinar, and I'm just, excited, and I was thrilled, to have you both presenters on our winter school. I would like also thank to our participants that always, were at our webinars. Thank you so much, and thank you. I'm also thanking ASIS, especially Kim, my always, supporter for these webinars, always being with me, answering my question during this whole winter school. So thank you, everyone. Kim, over to you.
All right, and I'd like to thank Dr. Homer and Dr. Sean here for this informative and practical webinar. I'm going to get off and work on some of my prompt engineering there. And Layla, it is my pleasure to work with you, and thank you for moderating this session. And thank you, SIG-III, for sponsoring. I want to remind our listeners that one of the many ASIS benefits is complimentary access to all webinars, and a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the slides will be posted to the ASIS website by tomorrow and be available to all ASIS members and paid registrants. Within 24 hours, attendees will receive an email with a recording of the webinar and a survey, and I encourage you to complete it within 7 days. Again, I'm Kim Granados with ASIS staff. I thank you for attending today's webinar, and this concludes our session.
Thank you so much.